Alright, thank you to the Modern Mystic for responding to my video. It makes me feel better about making them. Very few people watch them, so it's good that the person you're talking to at least watches them. So anyway, on the subject of standards again, and why cash is important in the reserve accounts, and there's a lot of talk as if this is all inconsequential, and I think that's just wrong to say it's all liquid, it's all the same, we don't have to make any distinctions. Yeah, I just think it's completely wrong-headed to do that, so I will go to the videos, attempt to anyway, and see if there's any comments first. So, but it's the same argument is being made that this new way this Fed is injecting money is not substantially different than the old way, and it is, and substantially more dangerous in terms of its threat to the value of the standard. And so I'm going to say that again, that cash is the standard, and there's always a standard. And so it's not about the fact of whether the government's good for it. Of course the government's good for 1.2 trillion. I mean, it would be good for 2.105 trillion. It'd be good for 3 trillion. That this is a minor amount of money in the overall context. So it's not about whether the cash is good. It's about the liquidity of the cash compared to the other commodities. And the fact is that cash will show its inflationary essence if you overprint it, because nobody will want to hold it. So I would just make the rational argument that in this current circumstance there's $4 trillion in these reserve accounts of dollars, cash. And you're saying the banks are satisfied because they're getting a little bit of interest, a tiny bit of interest. A bit of interest that doesn't even cover inflation on the regular economy, let alone inflation in the other commodities such as food, gold, or energy. So relative to the other commodities, it's huge inflation every year. So by holding cash, by holding that $4 trillion, if it was the bankers' money, they would be losing asset value every year, of some substantial percentage points, 3, 4, 5, 6% a year that they would be losing in terms of value. In an economy where these other commodities give you a profit every year, and you're saying, okay, it's so liquid, yet somehow the liquidity doesn't show itself or reveal itself. So the point is, if this was real cash that the banks thought was theirs, that they felt liable for, like it was their assets that were degrading in a vault somewhere, they'd want to get the thing degrading, the rotting thing, out of their vault and put something that doesn't rot in their vault. So that would create the buying pressure on other commodities that creates the inflation that deflates the value of a standard. So that's sort of the argument being made here, is if you print more cash, the consequence of the cash being active are really being a liability. Like I said, if the cash was in your pocket, you would sure know you wouldn't want it there. I mean, if you had $1 million in cash sitting in your attic and not gold, or buried in the yard, in the garden, you'd say, gee, I don't have a very good thing buried in my garden. I have a rotting thing in my garden. It has blight. Okay, my cash has blight. And you'd be damn interested in putting something else in the ground. And that's the theory here, is that the standard, if you erode it by overprinting it or overcreating it, creating too much of the standard, will reveal itself in the very fact that nobody will want to hold it. So all the banks would be switching it. They'd be saying, I don't want it, let's sell it to that, let's buy something from this other bank and dump the cash on him. And then they would get the cash and they'd say, we don't want this stuff, and they'd be trying to give it to somebody else. And that's the point of having a standard, and it's the point of having a standard for your economy that is your transfer currency. You want your transfer currency, the currency you use to make transactions, to degrade. So this is the thing you want, is for it to be active in the economy, but not so active that people are hostile to possessing it, because that will reveal itself in inflation in other commodities, because people will just keep buying other commodities to get rid of the cash. So they'll just keep bidding up other things to get rid of cash. You get it? I don't mean you get it like, okay, I don't mean to be... I'm just saying, I think you're underappreciating that it's more complex than whether the government's good for it. It has directly to do with the fact that it is the standard of the economy, that everything is demonetized in it. It's the dollar sign thing. Okay, and the dollar signs all change if you change the amount of cash. So if you create more cash, you create... it's like the word money tightening almost makes sense, in the sense that you would make money scarce, and therefore people would be selling in a positive way to get cash. They'd be selling. So there'd be selling pressure because people needed to get cash because they needed to pay taxes, or they needed to pay something that had to be paid in actual cash possession, in a more direct ownership of something like cash, which happens at the Federal Reserve when the banks do their books. So obviously in this circumstance there's a catch somewhere, right? I think we know, I think you know, that reserve account money isn't jumping from bank to bank every day. Okay, that it's basically stuck in some bank. and there's these certain banks that have the substance of this $4 trillion on their books, and it's not going anywhere. For whatever, however they've maneuvered this, engineered this, you're not liable for this thing. And somehow it's not being cashed out. The fake deposit digits that bought something else is not being rebalanced in the Fed's books. So when the bank that has the cash dumps it, because they don't want to hold cash, they want to hold anything but, and I think you got to know that part. They want to hold they want anything besides cash in their vault. Having cash in your vault as a banker means you're losing money, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But again, you want there to be just enough cash. Yes, I think that's a good enough way to say it. You want there to be just enough cash where people can get it. It's liquid enough to get if you have to, but you're going to have to sell something to get it. And it's that selling pressure that keeps inflation under control. And so if you print more cash, you will create more buying pressure, not selling pressure. You'll make cash more easy to access, which means there'll be no selling pressure into any of the other commodities. So that's how it does this inflation deflation thing. Because it's not like gold, where there becomes a run on cash in the real sense of a run on cash, because we know, unlike gold, its value isn't durable. And it's certainly not durable if there's this direct threat of the Fed printing cash. And it's a pretty direct threat, right? If a crisis shows up, we're going to see that cash become mobile in the economy and then become a hot potato still. Because again, it's not going to be something people can depend on its value if there's every evidence the government's just going to print it to pay its bills. And that's sort of what it will convert into. And so again, this is just a way, this gimmick, this QE gimmick, is just a way to reverse the selling trend and turn it into a buying trend. And that's what it effectively did in the stock market, is create buying pressure, not selling pressure, but there's a whole stored up amount of selling pressure now that's just been, walled away, but it's still real. The pressure is building up, and whenever it's released, it's just going to be obscenely destructive. So, yeah, I don't want to go on and on about this cash thing. You either get it or you don't get it. I'm saying I think you're missing. I think it's not correct for you to pretend that all assets are the same, that all digits are the same, that a stock is the same as a bond, is the same as a dollar bill, is the same as a credit card liability, is the same as, that they're all the same, that any digit is anything that says it's worth some kind of money, any commodity is any commodity. They're different commodities. They have different reasons for existing, and they have different rules about how high or how low they can go, and they got labels on them. And in a crisis, the labels are going to matter. All the liquidity people are talking about now ends. Okay? As soon as the stock market starts falling or something else happens, all of a sudden it's going to really matter to people, whether it's a dollar or it's gold or it's wheat or some other gold or oil. It's all of a sudden it's going to matter a lot what you own, what kind of digit you have. And there's not going to be any more of this liquidity stuff, because some stuff is going to be very vulnerable and some stuff is going to be a lot less vulnerable. And people are going to want to own the stuff that's less vulnerable, quite obviously. Right, but it's all overvalued now, so that's the real catch. Is there's a bunch of built up fake money, fool's gold. There's a bunch of fake gold mixed in the gold, and that's going to want to be sorted out. In a desperate economy, people are going to be a lot more careful about reading the label and finding out whether their gold is real gold. I guess that would be the point. Alright, so enough of the video. Keep it short and polite. And I don't think there's any other issue to point to here, but I just think it's to not concede that this is a substantially different circumstance. And if it was the bankers' money, they would take it out as they did traditionally. They never left their assets in the bank, in the Federal Reserve. Never. They always kept the minimum amount of money in the reserve accounts, and they did that for a reason. Because it doesn't do them any good in the reserve accounts. And you can say they can still trade it based on just writing checks to it and have the Federal Reserve work it out. But what I'm saying is that's obviously not happening. There's a reason why that money's staying where it's staying, is because the bank with $1 trillion of cash, let's say one of the banks has that much of this reserve cash, they would have already written those checks, and those checks would have already come to the Federal Reserve and required to be cashed out. And then those other banks would have had the money move into their column, and they would be finding some way to get rid of that money. Yeah, I just think that's obvious. How else to say this? The money would end up it would end up in the economy, as all the cash does. And the vault argument, like having to build, they don't have to build bigger vaults now. I mean, in the sense that, there's $1.2 trillion out there, and yes, some percentage of it is in the reserve accounts, and always was, but is held with the Federal Reserve by contract. I mean, the Federal Reserve does hold banks' cash, their other cash besides their reserve account cash. They do hold other cash. But again, the banks aren't going to want to hold trillions of dollars in cash. They're just not going to. No bank would want to hold $1 trillion in cash, because they're losing hundreds of billions of dollars a year doing that. Yeah, that's the way to put it. Alright. I probably, this little bit I added on probably didn't help at all. But anyway, you got to understand, standard is an important word, and it's a cash standard. That's the distinction. Instead of a gold standard, it's a cash standard. And to say there's no standard, I think is underestimating how the economy works. That the standard has to be there has to be something to be the standard, and whatever that thing will be the thing to decide relative to everything else what prices are, and whether you're whether you have inflation or you don't. Very important.